Hey everyone, welcome back. Ever look at the specs for a new computer or those graphics card ads and think, what does any of this even mean?
It can be pretty overwhelming, right? All those numbers and jargon.
Exactly. So today we're doing a deep dive into graphics cards or GPUs, breaking it down so you can actually understand what makes a good one and what you need.
Whether you're a gamer, a creative pro, or just tired of your computer sounding like a jet engine when you open too many tabs, we've got you covered.
So let's start with the basics. Like, what is a GPU anyway? I mean, most people have heard the term, but
Well, at its core, a GPU, or graphics processing unit, is a specialized electronic circuit, basically. It's a processor, but instead of handling all the general tasks of your computer like your CPU does,
right.
it's laser focused on one thing: images. Everything you see on your screen, from this video to games, even just your desktop, it's all thanks to the GPU.
So when people are talking about their graphics card, they're really talking about the thing that houses the GPU.
Exactly. It's kind of like the graphics card is the car and the GPU is the engine.
Okay, that makes sense. Now, there are two main types of GPUs we hear about: integrated and discrete. And this is where it starts to get a little confusing for people, I think.
Yeah, it can be a bit of a head scratcher. So integrated graphics, those are built right into your computer's CPU.
So it's like all in one package. Convenient.
Exactly. They share your system's memory and are great for basic tasks like browsing, emails, streaming videos, the everyday stuff.
And they're great for battery life too, right? Since it's all integrated, less power draw.
Absolutely. Which is why they're so popular in laptops. But, and this is a big but, they aren't as powerful.
Right, because they're sharing resources with everything else going on in the system.
Exactly. Now, on the other hand, you have discrete graphics cards, which are separate units with their own dedicated memory and processing power.
These are those beefier cards, right? The ones gamers are always after.
Exactly. They're like having a whole separate computer just for handling your graphics, which means they can handle much more demanding tasks. Like, think of AAA games with all the settings cranked up, 3D modeling, video editing, stuff like that.
Okay, so if you want the best possible graphics, discrete is the way to go. But there's always a but, isn't there?
Of course, there are always trade-offs. Discrete cards are generally more expensive, they need more power, and they can generate a lot more heat.
All right, so you might need a bigger case, better cooling.
And a beefier power supply, too. You don't want to skimp on that.
So the age-old question then becomes, do you really need a discrete graphics card?
Or can you get away with the integrated option and save some money? It all comes down to what you plan on using your computer for.
All right, so let's say you're thinking, okay, a discrete graphics card sounds pretty sweet.
When do you actually need to bite the bullet and get one?
Yeah, is it absolutely necessary for everyone?
Not really. Like I said earlier, if your computer use is pretty basic, browsing the web, checking emails, watching Netflix,
That kind of thing.
integrated graphics can handle that just fine these days. They've come a long way.
What about some light gaming? I mean, I'm not trying to run Cyberpunk on ultra settings, but
You'd be surprised what integrated graphics can handle now. A lot of older games, even some newer indie titles, they'll run perfectly smoothly on integrated.
really?
Oh, yeah. And even some of those more demanding games, you can often tweak the graphics settings down a bit and get a decent experience.
Okay, so integrated isn't completely useless, but if I am trying to run those AAA games, the latest and greatest.
That's where a discrete graphics card becomes a must-have, especially if you're rocking a high-resolution monitor or want those super smooth frame rates.
And what about stuff like video editing? I dabble a bit in that.
Oh, yeah, video editing, 3D modeling, animation, anything that's really graphically intensive, a dedicated graphics card is going to make a huge difference.
In terms of like speed, rendering, all that.
Exactly. We're talking faster render times, smoother playback, and just an overall better experience. It can be the difference between waiting hours for a video to export and, grabbing a coffee while it's done in minutes.
So, time for a hypothetical.
Yeah.
I'm convinced I need a discrete graphics card. What's the first thing I should be looking at?
Well, before you even start browsing cards,
Okay, yeah.
you need to know what your computer can actually handle.
Ah, right. Not all graphics cards are created equal.
Exactly. And not all computers can handle every graphics card.
So what do I need to check?
First up, your motherboard. Specifically, something called the PCIe slot.
KCI.
PCIe. It stands for Peripheral Component Interconnect Express, but nobody actually calls it that. It's basically the slot on your motherboard where the graphics card plugs in. And you want to make sure you have a PCIe by 16 slot That's the fastest type and what most modern graphics cards use.
Okay, so check for a PCIe by 16 slot on the motherboard. What about the power supply? We talked about those earlier.
Ah, yes, the power supply. Graphics cards can be real power hogs, especially those high-end ones.
Yeah, so we need to make sure our power supply can actually handle it, right?
Exactly. You'll see a wattage listed for every graphics card. That's how much power it needs. Make sure your power supply has enough wattage to spare.
Gotcha. So don't just buy the biggest, baddest graphics card without checking if your power supply is up to the task.
You got it. Don't want to blow a fuse, or worse.
Speaking of fitting in, what about the actual physical size of these cards?
Oh, yeah, that's an important one, too. Some of these graphics cards are massive. We're talking 2, even 3 slots wide.
2 or 3 slots.
Yep.
They need that space for cooling and all the components.
So before you click buy on that monster graphics card,
Make sure it'll actually fit in your case.
good point. Anything else we need to keep in mind before we move on to actually picking a card?
Just one more thing.
Yeah.
Drivers.
All right, drivers. So what are those again?
Basically, drivers are like little bits of software
Okay, yeah.
that tell your computer how to actually use the graphics card.
Right, because it's like a whole separate thing. It needs its own instructions.
Exactly. But the good news is most of the time, you don't have to worry about it too much. Windows is pretty good at automatically downloading and installing the latest
Oh, well,
drivers.
thank goodness.
That's always a relief. Okay, so assuming we've checked all those boxes, we know our system can handle a new graphics card. We're standing in the virtual aisle, staring at a wall of these things, all promising to be bigger and better than the last. How do we choose?
It can be a bit much, right? Like, where do you even start?
Exactly. It's like there's memory and cores and clock speeds.
Don't even get me started on ray tracing.
See, this is what I'm talking about. It's
Yeah.
a lot. So let's break it down. What are the key things to focus on when we're comparing cards?
All right, so first and foremost, you'll want to look at the memory.
The memory, okay.
This is basically how much information the card can store and access at once.
So more is better, generally.
Generally speaking, yeah. More memory means it can handle more complex tasks, higher resolutions, all that good stuff. You'll see things like 8 GB, 12 GB, even up to 24 GB on some of those top-tier cards these days.
So, what does that actually translate to in the real world? Like 8 GB versus 24 GB. What's the difference in what I'm going to see?
Well, let's say you're playing a game. A card with more memory is going to be able to store more of the game's textures, models, all those visual assets, which means it can display them at higher quality settings without stuttering or slowdowns.
Okay, so if I want to crank those settings up to ultra and actually enjoy them, more memory is my friend.
Pretty much. Same goes for things like video editing. If you're working with those big, high-resolution video files, more memory is going to make a big difference in terms of how smoothly things run.
Got it. Memory dot check. What's next on our list?
Next up, you'll want to consider the power requirements. We talked about this a bit earlier, but
Making sure our power supply can handle it, yeah.
exactly. You'll usually see this listed as TDP, which stands for Thermal Design Power. It basically tells you how much power the card is going to draw from your power supply.
Okay, so always check that TDP number and make sure our power supply has some wiggle room.
Exactly. It's always better to have a bit of headroom there than to risk overloading your system.
Right. So we've got memory, power. What else should we be thinking about?
The other big one is the physical size of the card. Again, we touched on this earlier, but some of these graphics cards are massive.
Yeah, those triple slot monsters.
Exactly. So before you get your heart set on a particular card, double check that it'll actually fit in your computer case. Measure the space you have available and compare it to the card's dimensions.
And it's not just about physical space, right? We also need to think about airflow.
You got it. These powerful cards generate a lot of heat, so you want to make sure there's enough space around it for air to circulate and keep things cool.
Okay, so we've covered memory, power requirements, physical size. Anything else, or can we finally talk about specific cards now?
One last thing, and this is a big one. Price.
Right, because these things can get pricey.
No kidding. You can easily drop a couple grand on a top-of-the-line graphics card. So it's really important to go into this with a budget in mind. Figure out how much you're comfortable spending and then stick to it.
And the good news is, there are usually some pretty good options at every price point.
Absolutely. You don't have to break the bank to get a decent graphics card. It all comes down to your specific needs and what you're planning on using your computer for.
Well said. And hey, if you're still feeling lost after all that,
Yeah.
don't worry, there are tons of resources out there to help you choose the right card.
Oh yeah, check out online reviews, comparison websites, see what other people are saying.
Exactly. Do your research, read the comments, And don't be afraid to ask questions.
And remember, have fun with it. Picking out a new graphics card should be an exciting thing.
It is. It's like the heart of your gaming rig. All right, that's going to do it for us on this deep dive into the world of GPUs. Hopefully you've learned a thing or two and feel a bit more confident navigating the world of graphics cards. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.